I am the Director of Marketing for Continuum. Great to see everybody here. And just to let everyone know, if you haven't seen me, you'll know that this is my first office hours here with Boris FX. And right now with Boris FX Learn, our office hours is a soft launch. So we're really interested to hear about what you thought about today's live stream, what you're thinking about the content, and let us know as we are figuring out these technical hurdles, which you like and did not like. Just before we begin into the actual topic itself, And hopefully everyone hears me okay. Just taking a look to see if I can see the chat, which I can't right now. Excellent. So just to let everyone know, today we're going to be talking about transitions, specifically continuum transitions, and how we can find some useful elements of that for our video content. And for today's presentation, I'm going to be showing transitions in a few different applications. I'm going to be looking at some of the new transitions. We'll hop inside of Avid Media Composer, and then we're going to look at some other transitions and some really unique use cases for them inside of Premiere Pro. And one of the transitions, I'll give you a sneak peek, actually happens to be particle illusion transition. So we have a particle plugin that's built into Continuum. It's also a standalone, but inside the Continuum package, all of your particle simulations can behave as transitions, and there's an effect for that transition. So what you're able to do is be able to place it as a transition onto clips, and then choose from thousands of presets that you can start to manipulate and change directly in your timeline. And it's just such a unique offering, I think. Usually when I do think about particle systems in general, it's always an effect. So to have something that's ready as a transitional element that you can place either on the edit point of clips or alternatively on a text source and using that as a fade in, fade out can be a really fantastic thing for your workflow. But overall, the Continuum package of 40 plus transitions can be extremely helpful in all of your editorial workflows. So really curious to see where you guys are from. Please mention that in the chat. I'm Nick Harauz, again, the Director of Marketing for Continuum. This is our second soft launch of Boris FX after Boris FX office hours. So let us know what you think and what content you'd like to also see on this channel. And now that that little bit of housekeeping is done, it's time to start to hop and share my screen with everyone. So I'm going to hop inside here and just double check. Can everyone currently see my screen? Just double checking to see that. Ben, good to go?
We're good to go.
That's Ben Brownlee, everybody. The voice.
I'm not really here. I'm not really here.
He's not really here, but he is here. Cool. So this is Premiere Pro right now. In fact, to start, I think I'm going to head inside of Avid Media Composer. And I have some timelines already prepared. With any type of transition workflow, and before you even dive into transitions, I think it's important to ask a few questions. I am a big believer that in many cases with content, I think it's important to have a seamless cut before you start playing with the idea of a transition to be a complement over that cut. So using techniques like J and L cuts, which would allow you to have separate audio and video coming in one after the other, and other techniques to cut from one clip to another, even using audio as a driving force, can be a big complement to that edit. And then what transitions come into play, not to mention effects, they are complements for your piece to bring that even further. So we're going to take some look at that and some examples. But whenever we head into any nonlinear video editor like Avid or Premiere Pro, it's good to see what is available and ships with the product first, and then how our transition specifically with the Continuum product line can help with your workflow. So in this instance, I'm going to head over to my effect palette, which holds a few things, filters for all of our effects. And then we have our transitions tab here. And we can see some basic transitions in the blend category that you've used if you are an Avid editor. These are the same basic transitions that you'll find inside of Premiere Pro or even Final Cut, where we have your dissolve, your basic fade in from colors, and fade to colors. And what you'll find is when you apply a transition to any edit point in your project, and then let's head straight into the effect mode to see this. Some of these transitions are very simple in terms of their properties and parameters for what you're able to do. And if you're looking to have anything more stylistically, you would want to build a transition along with an effect that you might need to keyframe. And here is where the power of Continuum lies, and that is that we're going to give you a lot more control over your transitions and what you're capable of doing inside of your nonlinear editor. So the same thing is going to remain true of fade to color and even fade from color, where we'll have one or two properties that exist inside of the transition. And in order to get something a little bit more robust, we would have to combine that with effects on either side of the clip, not to mention your transition like a dissolve or a wipe as a base. So let me remove that, and let's now head into the BCC transition category and let's just take a look at all of this that's available here. Like, there are a ton of transitions, over 40, close to 50, if I'm correct. And we can actually divide these transitions into two parts. So if I draw your attention to the top, you'll see specific transitions with a plus symbol right after BCC. And all of these transitions are newer. They lead to a preset gateway called the effects editor, which allows you to have transitional presets in some cases. Not to mention is GPU accelerated on your system. So in the latest release of 2022.5, BCC Plus transitions are new, and you get a free upgrade for that if you have a Continuum license. We then have a series of other BCC transitions, some which haven't been brought quite over to the BCC Plus line, but you'll see there are quite a great grab bag of goodies here in terms of sometimes simple wipes in cases, but in other cases, I was mentioning particle illusion, which is an effect. You'll see here there's a dissolve that's available that you can place onto clips. With that said, the particle illusion dissolve and several of these transitions, what I think is great about the Continuum workflow is that you have a series of effects that also have transitional counterparts. And it's great to think about, okay, well, while you might apply an effect to a clip several times in an editing workflow or in motion graphics, you end up keyframing that effect and maybe ramping up and down the values. But rather than having to start with an effect, a transition might be a better starting point in certain instances where you already have that animation kind of built in, either fading between clips or fading up from like the color of black. Let's start off really simple here in this instance. I'm going to start with one of the newer transitions. And with all transitional workflows, we can simply apply that to the edit point of a clip. And we want to make sure that when we do apply that transition, that we have enough handles in order to carry out that transition. Various NLEs or nonlinear editors are going to carry that out in different ways. But in order for this transition to take place, we need a certain amount of handles to exist beyond the incoming clip and the outgoing clip. So in editing terminology, whenever we're on an edit point, the outgoing clip is whatever is to the left of the transition, and then we have the incoming clip on the right. So keeping in mind the basic dissolve that I added earlier, let's just take a look at the properties that are included in the transition here. Let me just make sure I'm right over that. We'll go into the effects mode again, and you can already see that you have several other properties or parameters to start with. And what's funny is that you'll also see several categories here, which have little triangles or disclosure triangles, which are going to reveal other properties. In several Continuum effects, what we have is this organized in a fashion where we're going to give you the most amount of control at the top of the effect. So some of these geometry and stylization effects are what you're primarily going to want to go to right away when it comes to a transition. When it then comes to the fine tuning, you'll want to hop down further into the transition. Regardless, before you even end up starting to play with the properties, I would recommend hopping in to the effects editor. So in any host, the workflow is relatively the same In Avid, we're clicking on a little checkbox, which is going to bring us into the effects editor. And we're going to have a little effects editor badge, which we'll see inside of Premiere Pro in a second, if that is your editor of choice. And speaking of which, I'm really curious to see in the comments, and Ben, if there's any interesting comments when it comes to nonlinear editors, just let me know what you are using as your video editor of choice or motion graphic application. And then as a second question, what role does transitions play in your workflow? So if you're new to the effects editor, I find this to be a great way to work with both transitions and effects. What's new in terms of effects editor workflow is now that we can actually see both that incoming and outgoing clip that was in the Avid timeline. So right now, while I have a little bit of a slower playback because of the streaming that's currently taking place, I want you to see that we're able to see the incoming clip, and here is the outgoing clip right there directly. And if we're looking to get an idea of the transition, we can easily move this little line, which would represent our playhead, over the middle to see both shots. So we could say that this light leak is essentially a dissolve with the light effect built on top. And what you're seeing in the middle of the screen is a series of controls we can use to fine-tune how we move from one edit to the other. So we've got these easing controls, which are available for either side of the transition, not to mention where the dissolve even takes place, the light leak dissolve in this case. To see how these controls that I'm currently manipulating, what properties they are affecting, we can take a look here on the right-hand side, and this corresponds with the animation tuning section. So notice when I drag this line, this is affecting the dissolve duration, and the series of controls here with my curve involve the easing values. So we've got the ease mid, as well as our ease in and ease out controls. More importantly to me in the effects editor, besides manipulating the timing of the transition, is a gateway to picture what's possible with a specific transition or effect. And that has all to do with the presets that you see on the left-hand side. So we've got different glow presets for the light leaks. You can see that you can actually make even a horizontal strip pattern here, a double effect. And all of these specific presets were created here to allow you to see the possibilities of what is possible with this light leak transition. And as you start to click on these presets, you'll notice, specifically if I drag up here at the top and we take a look at some of the geometry and stylize properties in the parameters, they'll start switching values based on the preset that I select. So we can think about this as, okay, we can get a starting point with a look of a preset, such as this bright, soft, strong glow, and then start to make this actual transition exactly what we want for our piece. In the parameters section, we can play around with the position of the light leaks and the scale, and then start to play around with the look more in terms of how opaque it is going to appear over our video in conjunction with that dissolve. The exposure, as well as other settings like blur, and some of my favorites, which happen to be the speed of the light leak, of how it's traveling across the screen, either from left to right, up or down, etc. There's also even built-in flicker speed here, which would add a little flicker to your light leak as a transition. And the best part is, even if you're using light leaks right now as a transition or as an effect, you're going to be able to have the exact same properties or parameters available for you, minus some of the animation tuning in the counterpart. But all of the curl correction section, not to mention the stylize and geometry, also translate to the light leaks effect that's available for you. So I've tweaked some of these properties here, and I'm going to press apply, move my playhead a little bit further, and let's just take a look at the current result here we have with the light leak. Not quite real time, but we can get a sense for that transition and then start to tweak it further, whether it be in the host or going back into the effects editor. But generally, when it comes to the BCC plus transitions, that's going to be your workflow. You can drag a transition onto any clip. Inside your effect mode, head into the effects editor, choose a preset, make a couple tweaks when it comes to properties or parameters, and then head back into your host. Cool. I'm going to open up another sequence here. Let's go in here. And I'll head back into the effects palette. Again, here we have all of our various transitions. And I want to take a look at two here. Rather simple, but in a piece like this, this could actually help with some really stylistic dissolves in certain cases, or even glow effects depending on the pace or pulse of the piece. I'll select one of the newer effects first, just so that we can take a look at that, which is the film glow dissolve. And it should be noted, just like light leaks, we have a actual effect counterpart for this. And with transitions, the workflow being the same, where we go into the effect mode, and let's head into the effects editor. Again, you're already starting to see here with some of the properties what we can do to control this actual film glow and its style. And we also have a little bit of a preview as we transition from one clip to another. When it comes to a transition, I like to just get a sense for how we're moving from one shot to another, but always like to start to make changes when it comes to the effects editor very close to the center of the edit to see what it will be at its brightest point, right? Because we're simply ramping up from 0% in all values of the transition all the way up to 100% and then back down. Let's click on a few presets.
Oh, can I just break in a second, please, Nick?
You can totally break in, Ben.
Thank you very much, because I've got a very good question, actually. Yeah. Michael asks, is there a builder like there is for Sapphire with Continuum?
Continuum does not have a builder when it comes to transitions. However, what you do have when you're working with one transition, such as glow, is the ability to make changes to these properties here on the parameter side of things, and then be able to save a preset. So I don't know if you can see right now, Ben, and great question, by the way, on the top right-hand side, the little list, that's how you can create a custom preset. And I think what's very cool about this is that you already kind of have your basic transitional build. So that happens to be your dissolve minus with a glow effect in this case. And we can then come in here and make changes to these properties. And then after we've made those changes, you can then save this as a preset that will exist inside of the effects editor. But more important to me is I can actually share this preset with anyone in a different host who has Continuum. So a lot of times my workflow actually consists where I do quite a bit of video editing inside of Final Cut and Premiere, and I end up having to share that with someone inside of Avid Media Composer or even After Effects. And the fact that I can actually transfer these transitions that I've built over to them is a pretty solid workflow. In the instances of trying to get something more like Sapphire Builder, I'll use techniques directly in the timeline and then save out sequences that sort of have multiple transitions stacked on top of each other to then provide them with that sort of robust look. I have an example a bit later in my Premiere timeline where what I did is I used a particle illusion transition as a base, and then on a duplicate clip on top, added a video glitch and then mixed the two clips together for an end result. And because there's a dissolve happening at the exact same time at the beginning of the clip, it looks like those two shots are mixed. So I hope that shed some light on the situation. Ben, did you have something to add on that front from a Sapphire workflow?
No, I mean that's you pretty much nailed it there, and the question asker is very happy. So thanks, Nick, and thanks, Michael.
Awesome, thanks, Michael. Yeah, so heading back, in fact, we can do this. I'm going to select these horizontal. In fact, let's go with this bright glow, no desaturated look. It is very bright, but we can start to tweak this. So I'll bring down the glow intensity so you guys can see this. I don't know if you actually see to the right of the glow intensity property, but this little button here acts sort of like a reset. So if you click on it, you're able to reset that property or that value and get a sense for what you're looking at. Another thing I like to do with effects, but as well as transitions, is kind of do comparisons of before and after. And I'll show you a kind of a cool way of trying to compare things with transitions. One is, let's just say that I'm going to sample also a color here, some of the blue color here from the window, and actually just pull back in that color's intensity. I will increase that glow radius a bit. And then just always draw your attention down here to the RGB independent section, where we can start to actually have glows that have a little bit of RGB separation. And what we're essentially doing is either bringing down the uniform scale value that you see here for red, green, or blue, or separating the scale into X and Y values. So depending on the type of RGB separation you're looking for, you could hop down here to the X scale, simply bring that down in the red to 0 and leave the Y at 100. And then do something else here where we have a bit of a stepping process between the different glows. To see that even clearer, I might bring up the radius so we can hopefully see a bit of the red, green, blue separation here, which is a nice little effect to have, and happens not only to be in the glow, but in a few of the different bright transitional aspects that we have. Now, once you have a look that you like, but are still trying to audition transitions, potentially the same general transition for your entire piece, I'd recommend doing a two-step process. Step number one is there's no harm in actually saving a preset. So I'm going to call this bright glow blue, and actually also add the number 41, which is referring to the glow intensity right now. And maybe a little note for myself here that I've done a bit of RGB separation. So I'll add that. I'll make this a preset. We can see that here. And the second step that I'm going to do is actually take a snapshot of it. Okay. So this snapshot can't quite be seen just yet, but let's just say that I want to then compare it to another look that I'm going to build. So maybe I'm going to use the bright glow as a starting point. In fact, maybe go slightly different with the big soft film glow. I'll bring up the intensity in this case, bring down the radius. And this time I'll use a complementary color on top of the blue instead, just to experiment. Let's go with an orange, but bring down a bit of that color so it's just subtle over top. And maybe start to play with the glow threshold, which is how many bright pixels is it affecting. So this is kind of like a ramp up for the brighter pixels in your shot. When you up the threshold, this is going to include less bright pixels that will be affected by the glow. So here's kind of like a second look that I'm experimenting with. And then we have that snapshot. So in this workflow, because I'm experimenting here in the effects editor, I can actually view the previous snapshot that I had by just clicking here. But even better, there's this A/B comparison mode where you can do a side-by-side comparison. So this is sort of the start of the original shot, and then here's the transition. But the cool part is we can actually even add a snapshot to the mix. So here's that bright glow blue 41 RGB preset I saved. It's not showing because it's a preset, it's showing because I saved a snapshot. And then I can compare it here with what I'm currently working on. And I think that this is a pretty awesome workflow just to be able to either do an A/B comparison or just here you can see what I'm currently looking at and then my new snapshot, kind of getting a sense for what I like better. Now, once you're decided on a look or whatever is more suited for your piece, now you have the opportunity to leave your effects editor and head back into your host. So I'm back here in the host and I've got my dissolve taking place there, which is really nice. I want to hop back in temporarily to the effects editor to show you one more thing, which is this preset that I saved. And when we take a look at that preset, which is now alphabetically ordered correctly, because I headed back into the host, I can actually right click or control click it and see that I can open up the custom preset location where I've saved it. I have a few different glow presets I've saved here in the past, but take a look at that size. Like it's a 3 kilobyte file, like an XML document. It's very low in size, which to me makes this ideal, number one, to share with another editor on a different system who can bring in that preset and utilize it as long as it's stored in the correct location or they bring that in. So this is just great for cross-platform workflows. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if you're editing in Premiere and your other editor is inside of Premiere Pro or Final Cut, you can start sharing those effects and transitions between those editing apps. And it's just another way to transfer data, which I think is extremely helpful. The same thing if someone is working in DaVinci Resolve. You've got this lightweight XML file available to you and ready to go. Cool. So there's that transition that I saved. I want to now, let's transfer over into Premiere Pro. We're going to take a look at a few stylistic examples as well as particle illusion. So let's hop inside there. And can you see my screen okay?
It's looking lovely.
I love it. I love it when that happens. One of my favorite effects in the Continuum arsenal for transitions happens to be crash zoom. And don't let the name of my actual project fool you, transitions. We are talking about transitions. I just wanted to clarify that to everyone who's tuning in right now. It is a transition conversation, not a transition. So when it comes to crash zoom, which is my favorite Continuum effect, it has a lot of energy and is literally what I consider to be your transportation to words, or basically between two worlds. And with a transition like this and other transitions that exist inside the Boris FX suite, some in Sapphire as well, which have these high energy feels to them like hyperpole, they're best served on footage that is moving to some degree, has a lot of motion and movement, and it will support that. So when I take a look at these shots, we have some nice camera movement, but it's almost too fluid in this case. And what I want to do before I actually apply this crash zoom transition, which is now GPU accelerated in a BCC plus effect, is add just a little bit of shake to these shots. Okay. So I'll do that actually by just typing in BCC plus. This is a great way to find all the GPU accelerated effects and transitions that exist in our system. And just the simple search is going to make sure that that's all we see. But in this case, since I know it's all about camera shake, here we see that we have a camera shake effect and then also a camera shake dissolve that we can use as a transition. In this instance, I'm going to apply this as an effect onto the first clip, make some changes to the shake inside the effects editor, and then paste the attributes of this effect onto my other clip making a few other changes before we place the crash zoom on it. And you might be able to already see a little bit of motion. It's quite subtle when you apply crash zoom the first time, but there is an amplitude and a translation control, which are two of the main properties of this effect to get you started. But to see this, like I said, we already also see the similar workflow between Avid and Premiere, where I've applied an effect or a transition. We've got this effects editor button for the BCC Plus effects, where we enter and are able to start working. One thing that I love about Camera Shake is that these presets were actually curated by John Dickinson. So we have a couple great Camera Shake effects here. Some of these effects, let's try this again. Frantic should give us an idea of how crazy this can get. But we have a lot of shakiness there happening with the shot, creating some energy just before we actually apply the transition. We don't want it to be this crazy, but it can get that crazy if you need it to be. Some of the reasons that this is this crazy, I'll stop playback in order not to give everyone a headache right now, is mostly due to the translation control here. I want you to see that it's ramped up all the way to 20. By simply just resetting this where you have a start value of 1, while you still do have some shakiness, it's not happening in some cases as frequently, but we do have a little bit of aggressive movement still, also because of the speed and the amount of scale and rotation that's involved with that camera shake. So in trying to divide this in half, I'm going to first of all bring down the scale and then cut also my scale value and the amount of rotation in half. And now we can see that we have a little bit of a shakiness of a plate, not as great as it was. And if we need to just dial that up a bit, instead of 20 where we started, winning all the way back down to 1, maybe start with a value of 3, just to get a little bit more shake and even play with that scale until we get a look that we like. Another great thing about this camera shake just in general, and this also goes to the transition, is the fact that when we look at different edge modes, right now, depending on how aggressively this shakes, at the edge of the clip, you can see here that it's currently reflecting the same clip, almost making it seem seamless. But depending on what you're going for, you can do something like repeat, which is going to change the edge mode slightly, and then repeat certain elements versus reflect. And then we have another change here, which is transparent. You can see almost no repeating or reflection of the original image, but almost like a gray border. So you do have options in terms of how, depending on aggressive shakes there are, if this is going off screen, to have that repeated effect, which is just a nice thing to have built in when you're looking for some camera shake. Cool. I'll also just speed this up a bit. And then now that I have that, I'll apply that and head back into the host. Again, if this was something that I would be looking to experiment with different camera shakes, I didn't necessarily have to leave the effects editor so early. I could have started to save a preset, have that saved to the library, then try out a few different properties and experiment within there. And then when I got to the point where I was happy, head back into the host. But here we have a bit of shake. Now looking at it again in a bit of better playback, I can see that it is still a bit too aggressive. So I'm going to pull back on that amount. And a bit more. And once ending up with a value that I like, with that energy created, maybe bring down the speed a bit too. Start to take this effect and then paste it onto the other effects. So with this, I'll press Command C or Control C on my Mac, Control C on a PC, select the other two clips and just perform not a remove attributes, but a paste attributes, so that the same camera shake is now applied to all 3 of these clips. Now it's the exact same, So we could play with this a bit where we have a little bit of a stronger camera shake at the beginning. And then as we start to introduce each of these shots, start to break down the values for translation and speed so that it's less aggressive, introducing the story, so to speak. So I'll bring down the translation for the middle clip to 0.5 and then the speed to 100, a bit more subtle, and then maybe play with the translation here with the last clip, where there's just a lot less as we introduce the story. Cool. And in fact, I'll go back to my original clip, bring up that value a bit too. So we do have a little bit of a transition between each of those shakes. So now that we have a little bit more movement, and we can play with this and also do some playing with the camera movement too to make it more aggressive by keyframing some values, let's apply the crash zoom effect. I just did a search. Here we find it in BCC Transitions, and I'll apply it to the first edit point here. And one thing I love about this is you get this automatic, pretty great transition for those high impact stories right away, where you'll see almost like an ultra zoom mixed with some blurring and some stepping between your two worlds that you transport to, or in this case, the same world, but at just at different times. Now with crash zoom, similar workflow, we've got the effects editor designed there for transitions, along with several controls that we can play with there to fine tune the transition and the element itself. One of, I would say, the most important in this case is, let me select the transition so we can see this, is the zoom delta. So that's the amount of zoom between your two shots. And if I draw your attention to the side of the image, you'll see that very similar to the camera shake effect, we have an edge mode currently set to reflect, but we also have repeat. We also have transparent, which are going to give you very different looks when you move from that one clip to the other. We also have the ability, in very high impact scenarios, to take this effect and what I like to call even add more craziness to it, or almost more aggression, by adding or boosting the motion blur that is currently occurring over each of those shots. In addition to this, and in most transitional effects such as this, there's almost like an engine that's shared between a crash zoom, a prism dissolve, and smear blur, where you have, and you can see through several other transitions as well, we have control over the RGB settings, not to mention the amount of blur that is in the overall effect. So what I have found in my own learning curve with Continuum is that once you start hopping into one transition, a lot of the convenience of adding even another transition is that you can gain some of the most popular controls in that other transition, but with the general style that you're looking for your actual piece. So pretty cool. We've added now that crash zoom, and just like we can see here inside of the effects editor, we've got several presets that you can start to play with directly to get the look that you're going for when it comes to your crash zoom look. So not only is there the actual zoom, but an angle that you can add to it as well, depending on the look and feel of the video that you're going for.
Cool, Nick. I've got another question, if you can.
I can think about it. I can totally think about answering the question.
Yeah. Sam asks, I normally use S Shake, so the Sapphire Shake. Is the advantage to BCC Plus that it renders faster?
That is a great question, and unfortunately, I can't answer that. I haven't actually done speed tests against each of them. So what I can do, though, is do some tests and get back to you, though. I'd be happy to do that, because I've used both of those shakes as well, but I haven't used S Shake in a while, so it would be unfair to draw that comparison. Ben, have you Have you done any tests with S-Shake versus the actual BCC camera shake?
First of all, I want to apologise to everyone for my manic direction there. Like Nick said at the beginning of the stream, this is a new system we're working on. So the fact that Nick just went for a big sort of journey around the screen there for a second, that was all my fault.
Oh,
don't worry about it. It looks fine.
I didn't see it. I gotta see it on replay.
I'm perfect director.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't done like one-to-one tests on it. They are different effects though. I think like there's some things that S-Shake does slightly differently to the BCC Plus shake, the camera shake there. So it's kind of a little bit apples and oranges, but it just means that if you've only got Continuum, you now have like a really nice camera shake filter, and if you only have Sapphire, then you can use that as well. If you have both of them, then you can compare and contrast. But I think it's might be a nice idea just to have a little look, but it's never going to be apples to apples with those two filters, I don't think.
Yeah, and even to add to that, just some thoughts about the different effects, because there are different properties and ways of getting around how to create the shake. Not to mention different properties or end looks that you can add to them. So there is a bit of a stylistic difference between them, and you might prefer one over the other in certain cases. Then there is the element of, well, in some areas, Continuum will work in certain applications where Sapphire won't. But on the opposite, with Sapphire, you can have a camera shake, and then essentially using S effect, you could build other effects on top of it. So on that workflow, you could essentially build up some pretty cool, robust effects, which will help you get to a faster end result on, let's say, a next show, or if you're doing a series. So I think there's advantages to them both, and it really all depends on your workflow. And I guess the other side to that being the style that you're looking for. And then for me to get back to you, which is on the speed. Cool. I wanted to end the office hours here looking at, in my opinion, is the most unique transition. And we started chatting about it earlier. It happens to be particle illusion transition. I've used in the past particles as a transition by various generators, both in-house, and then we then have the Boris FX suite line of products. But then knowing that it actually has a transition that is built inside that you can use for both motion graphics for reveals, as well as, not to mention, just integrate that into your footage, I think is really cool, and needs a lot more exploration that has then currently been done. So when I do a search here for BCC, particle illusion is not going to be a part of the Plus family, but that doesn't mean to say it's not speedy. We're going to find it inside our BCC Transitions category. And when we find that transition and we apply it to an edit point, we're going to get a slightly different workflow than what we saw with the effects editor. And this is kind of my favorite part about this particle illusion, and then using it as a transition, or particles as a transition. So in this instance, we're going to start off something really simple where I just have a shot of eraser and then some text reveal. Particle illusion is far from glamorous when you first put it on. We get a bit of a dissolve, but its real power comes into going into effect controls and then launching particle illusion. And it's here where, first of all, I recommend you going to the view menu if it's not already set up, and just set it to browse. Now, browse is going to show you this entire library of different particle simulations. Depending on what you know about particles, that could even be deceiving, because not only do you have particles, but you also have some like heads-up display designs, moving fluids, some really interesting stuff that can be used as dissolves and adds a completely new style than what you would generally expect to be a transition coming from the video editor perspective. So we've got dissolves and wipes, and while these particles will act as a dissolve in many cases, we could also use them as wipes, and even in some cases reveals by having them come in and off screen. But here we have a slider where we can make these little building blocks bigger to get a sense for each of these transitions. Not to mention click on one, and in many cases of the individual particles, get a little preview here in this upper window. And you might be wondering, okay, you're kind of zooming in and out of the transition. And this is all just with my middle mouse button in this case. In fact, I'm just going to settle on a size of, yeah, let's go right there. And then click through a few of these transitions to get a sense for the look of these. And again, particle illusion is an effect. So in many cases, you could just apply this as effect onto a solid inside of Premiere Pro, and that could serve as a background in many cases. But I would say through my own exploration, there are some pretty cool things you can do to help particle illusion even be used as a source to help reveal things like text or other elements in your scene to transition from one to the other. Besides this grid view where we can see, again, let me actually zoom out so we can just take a look at the vastness of all of these presets that you have available. Like, it literally is this massive library of particles, and now all set up for these transitional counterparts. Like, super cool. And I'm going to do a search here in the library just for something very simple, which is vapor. We have just variations of different particle systems that have vapor here. And I have this upper trail with one of these vapor trails. Yeah, let's go with this vapors. And I'm going to head from my view menu and then just go to edit. I could see here that this particle system, the one that I double clicked, the vapors 2, is now on this stage. And how I can see that is by pressing play. And the components that make up these particles are these little building blocks that you see down here. Vapors, and then the tendrils, not to mention, again, its movement off screen. I'm just going to make some very basic changes to this. I'm going to go select the Vapors 2 building block or the node and head over here to the properties where I see several things that determine how many particles there are in terms of the number that we start with, the lifespan of how long they exist, the position that they're in, their size, and at least to get me started, how they're being emitted. So they've been rotated 90 degrees, which is why they're flowing upward. But I'm just going to have them go back down to 0 so that we have them floating across the screen. The idea here is to have this vapor trail kind of move in the same fashion as the smoke that we saw kind of going over that race car driver's car. We want the same type of field to go over our text or the text element that I'm adding it to. I'm going to now also use this zoom value to zoom in on this a bit more, and then just get a general idea of how I want this particle to be positioned over the text. The great part is some of these main control values are also available in the host, so I can get a general look and a general feel for how those particles look. And then when I go back to the host to see how it is going to be over my text, do the actual fine tuning of that particle system. I'll increase the lifespan of these particles just a little bit and the number. I don't want to bring it up too much because I'm getting too many bright spots because they're so clumped together. That's not to say that I can't change how large the scale of these particles are in the y-axis in this case. So now that we have that set up, I'll press apply. We'll head back into Premiere Pro. We can see that particle system now. We've got a general floating taking place here, revealing with the text, not quite set to the timing that we're looking for. But the great part is that we got in that general area when we were inside of particle illusion with all of those presets. We can now start to just play around with some here in the host. Such as I mentioned, we have a world center here and an emission offset, which is going to place this a little bit better over the text. And I even have controls for the scale or the master scale of the system and the rotation, right here inside of Premiere Pro. The other thing that I can play with is how this is blending in with the text as we do the reveal. So some of this, I'm going to want to play around with the animation tuning, maybe ease this a bit less in the mid and at the end, just to play around with how that's moving in unison with the clouds. So that it just feels a bit more integrated together. And the other thing I might want to do is play around with a bit of the compositing style. So in this instance, maybe selecting some of the blues within the image to match the color of the smoke. Playing around with the contrast of the particle system, its timing, so that these move together to make a kind of a cool reveal of the text. Now, while this is sort of a basic example where we talk about smoke and integrating it into an actual shot, I found a couple cool creative examples that I wanted to go through just before we end here office hours. And one is, here's a shot of a awesome hacker. And I wanted to particle illusion dissolve. I wanted to see if I could actually find something that would have like these almost text elements, very similar to what the hacker has here. And it just so happened that under launching particle illusion and going here to the browse section of the layout, I'm going to do a search for fingerprint. And there's a few different types of fingerprints, but what I really liked was this fingerprint check because we had some numbers that were built into it. Also, a pretty cool fingerprint texture, as well as a kind of glitchy shape element that's happening over top. I'm just going to apply that. Actually, I'm not going to apply that. I'm going to go back into particle illusion and double click and then apply it because I forgot to add it to my stage. So second time is a charm. Let's go here, double click the fingerprint check. And then just to show you that this was added to the stage and the components that make up the system. And by the way, here you can see some of these, like the number element that's currently animating. We could go in here and actually change some of the individual gradients so that we have unique color patterns, so to speak, here over our particle system. But in the host, depending on what I'm looking for, I could also add an overall tint value that goes on top of the orange colors that exist here. But here we have that. I'll make another change there to one of the lines so we get some green components here. There we go. And now that I have a few of those changes made, I'm going to head back to applying, back into my host, and we can start to see how this is kind of dissolving in on top of our footage. Now, again, I can play with the length of this transition. I've still got those overall controls available for me for the actual particles. So let me select this. I want to do a few things. Let's play with the size of this particle system. And then, as I mentioned, you can have a color look to try to give a tint to all of the elements. So it feels a bit more blended into the scene. And we can even take this a step further by playing with the brightness of the overall dissolve that we've added on top of it. And then where the actual element that we're dissolving in comes on top of our footage. So that just kind of, at least this, which I, in the previous example, had this mixed in with yet another fingerprint that I added to the scene and placed here, added for some like interesting kind of dissolve that could be used like a textural element and placed and integrated into your footage. And going back to an earlier question, Ben, here was an example where I had an adjustment layer that I placed inside my Premiere Pro timeline. Let me also enable it because I believe I turned it off. And then just on top of that adjustment layer is the video glitch dissolve transition. And you can see here how I stacked those two elements together, where I have the particle illusion dissolve at the bottom, followed by a video glitch to kind of give an overall interesting type of fade in look unique to this type of footage that I'm using. Leaving off here just on particle illusion, here was another particle element that I used in between these two shots of which was used as the hero image for today's live stream. If I just render this out quickly, I wanted to mention that this specific element is called Twisty Twists. I made a few changes to the parameters, but there's another little sub menu if you don't feel like going into launching particle illusion that you can go to access some presets, and it's at the top of the effect. So this Twisty Twists, which also exists here, this is where you can affect it. And then I made some color changes to it as well as positional changes in order to end up with the overall look that you saw before this. So changing those colors to orange and matching some of the tones of the imagery, and then creating a dissolve with the help of that overlay, the dissolve as well as the particle overlay over the footage. Cool. And that was my little presentation on transitions and using them inside of Continuum. So I just wanted to check in. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Here I am again. I wanted to see if there were any comments. What did everyone think about transitions and some of the things that I covered? Do you guys find particle illusion useful? Could you see that in a use case for a certain show that you're working on right now, or maybe in the future?
Now we have the little bit where I sort of pop in with my little sprite there because I don't have my camera on. No, that was that was really good, Nick. 'Cause I must say that I've really I sort of slept on particle illusion dissolve. Really, it's not something that I've experimented too much with, and it's kind of, yeah, it looks really good. And I think a lot of the presets, like the thing that you just showed right at the very end, the little actual preset rather than particle illusion presets, they're actually a really great place to start if you don't fancy just diving into the full particle illusion bit.
Yeah, the fact that you kind of have them available like right in the host from that drop down menu with some of them, I think are really useful. And as I continue to play, because I'm still trying to figure out more use cases of particle illusion transitions myself, my brain goes towards like these ideas of creating backgrounds with like the actual standalone version of particle illusion, but then having an extra element that you have for certain elements where they can sort of be dissolved into this particle illusion background. Like they can be revealed by that same particle illusion preset and have these sort of graphical elements that take shape or come a part of your particle simulation. So that's something that I'm going to be exploring with next. But yeah, having these cool already existing particle illusion backgrounds that are tweaked and then colorized towards your brand, and then having graphical elements sort of take place with that world that you've created through a transitional reveal.
And now we've just got to get them in flame according to chat.
Yes, we do. I'm gonna give that task to you, Ben. Is that in your department?
Let's come back to me on that one, I think. Yeah, thank you. All right.
So guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, this is our sort of soft launch of Boris FX after our office hours. I'm saying after hours, but it's not after hours. So please let us know like what you think in the comments, or what you would like to see in terms of topics. We have several products within the Boris FX arsenal, and we would love to hear that, and what you thought about transitions, and anything that you want to hear about when it comes to Continuum. Please feel free to drop me a line as well, and I will be looking into the chat of this, not to mention prepare some material for anything or workflows that you're looking for in the Continuum line. And I think that's it.
Say goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.